My name was the next one on the list. I stood up with my graduation gown brushing against my knees, the low murmur of the auditorium fading into that familiar hum of applause and camera shutters. 4 years of late nights, borrowed textbooks, and quiet sacrifices had led to this single moment. I adjusted the cap on my head and took a breath. Emily Carter. That was me. I took one step into the aisle, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure the people around me could hear it. Parents leaned forward, phones raised, faces glowing with pride. Professors smiled from the stage. For a split second, everything felt unreal, too perfect, too fragile. Then a voice cut through the room. She cheated. The words didn't just echo. They hit. Gasps rippled across the auditorium as someone stood up behind me. I turned slightly, already knowing who it was before I saw her. My sister. She doesn't deserve that diploma, she shouted again, her voice sharp and shaking. She cheated her way through the program. The applause died instantly. The air went heavy, thick enough to choke on. A faculty member froze halfway out of their seat. The dean's smile vanished. Even the photographer lowered his camera. I felt every eye land on me, some confused, some curious, some already judging. My parents didn't say a word. My sister kept standing, arms crossed, as if she'd finally said something she'd been holding in for years. I could feel my hands trembling beneath the folds of my gown, but I forced them still. I didn't look back at her again. I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. Instead, I did the only thing that felt right. I turned forward, and I kept walking, because in that moment, I knew something no one else in that room did. And I also knew that if I stopped now, I would be letting her write my story for me. So I walked on straight toward the stage and straight toward the truth that was about to come out. Looking back, what happened at my graduation didn't come out of nowhere. It was the loudest moment in a pattern that had followed me my entire life. In our family, roles were assigned early. My younger sister was the miracle, the spark, the one everyone worried about protecting. I was the responsible one, the backup plan, the child who didn't need much. When she forgot homework, teachers were blamed. When I succeeded, it was treated like something inevitable and therefore unremarkable. Growing up, praise came easily to her and quietly to me, if at all. At dinner, my parents asked about her feelings, her struggles, her dreams. I learned to summarize my day in one sentence so we could return to hers. I learned that being low maintenance meant being invisible. That dynamic followed us into adulthood. When I worked 2 jobs through college, it was framed as character building. When she switched majors again, it was framed as self-discovery. If I stayed up all night studying, I was too intense. If she skipped class, she was finding herself. By the time we were both enrolled at the same university, the comparison sharpened. My grades rose quietly. Her frustrations grew loudly. Any achievement of mine was met with jokes about how I must have help or comments about how stress-free my life supposedly was. I stopped correcting them. Explaining myself had never changed anything. What hurt most wasn't her jealousy. It was how familiar it felt. I had been preparing for that moment long before the ceremony, even if I didn't know it yet. Every dismissal, every minimized success, every time my parents chose silence over fairness taught me one lesson. In our family, my accomplishments were acceptable only as long as they didn't outshine hers. So when she stood up to tear me down in front of everyone, it wasn't shocking. It was simply the pattern, finally loud enough that no one could pretend it wasn't there. I didn't grow angry. I grew observant. I learned when to stay quiet, when to document, when to wait. That patience would matter later. Families teach you survival long before they teach you love, and I carried those lessons with me into that auditorium that day at graduation itself, alone silently. What no one in that auditorium knew was that my academic life didn't stop at lectures, exams, and grades. While my name looked like just another line in the program, I had been living inside the system my sister accused me of gaming. By the end of my second year, one professor noticed how often I stayed after class, asking questions not about answers but about process. How research was evaluated. How data was verified. How academic integrity was enforced beyond the handbook no one read. He offered me a position as a research assistant, then later recommended me for a student liaison role with the department's academic integrity committee. It wasn't glamorous. It was quiet work. Long hours reviewing submissions, flagging inconsistencies, documenting sources, learning how plagiarism actually appeared when people thought they were clever. I learned how accusations were investigated, how evidence was weighed, how false claims unraveled under scrutiny. I learned how careful the system truly was, and how rarely it failed when rules were followed. I never told my family about any of it. There was no point. They already believed success came from shortcuts or favoritism. Letting them think that was easier than explaining how much effort went into being meticulous, ethical, and invisible. What hurt most was that I had once used that knowledge to protect someone. During my junior year, a student I cared about panicked after making a citation mistake that looked worse than it was. I helped guide them through the process honestly, knowing the difference between an error and an offense. That experience taught me something else. People who truly cheat don't shout accusations. They fear scrutiny. They deflect. They create chaos so no one looks too closely at their own work. So when my sister stood up and screamed that I cheated, I didn't feel panic. I felt certainty. Because I knew exactly how the system worked. I knew what records existed. I knew whose name had quietly appeared where mine never had. Most importantly, I knew the truth was patient. It didn't need me to yell. It only needed time to speak. And time was already moving forward. The moment my sister shouted, the ceremony didn't just pause, it fractured. People shifted in their seats, unsure whether they were witnessing a misunderstanding or the start of something ugly. A few parents lowered their phones. Others kept recording, instinctively sensing that this was no longer a celebration but a spectacle. I could hear whispers spreading outward, quick and sharp, like static. My sister didn't sit back down. She took a step into the aisle, her voice rising with every word, feeding off the silence she'd created. She repeated the accusation, louder this time, adding details that sounded rehearsed. She copied papers. She manipulated grades. Everyone knows she's not that smart. That last part stung more than I expected, not because it was true, but because it was familiar. It was the version of me she'd always needed others to believe in order to feel secure. I glanced toward my parents. They were frozen. My mother's hands were clenched together in her lap. My father stared straight ahead, jaw tight, as if refusing to look might make the moment disappear. Neither of them told her to stop. Neither of them said my name. That silence landed heavier than the accusation itself. On stage, faculty members exchanged looks. One of the marshals took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, clearly unsure who the problem was supposed to be. The dean leaned toward the microphone, paused, and then pulled back again, waiting for me. I felt my pulse in my throat, but my body stayed calm. Years of being underestimated had taught me how to stand still while storms passed around me. I smoothed the sleeve of my gown, adjusted the tassel that had slipped, and took a slow breath. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I turned slightly toward my sister and met her eyes for the first time since she'd stood up. There was something almost hopeful in her expression, like she believed this was the moment everything would finally tilt in her favor. Then I looked away. Without a word, I stepped forward again, toward the stage. That was when the tension truly shifted, because I wasn't reacting the way she expected. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't begging. And the more composed I remained, the more obvious it became to the faculty, to the audience, to everyone watching that this wasn't a confession unfolding. It was an attempted execution. And I had just refused to lie down for it. I didn't stop walking when I reached the edge of the stage. I slowed, just enough to let the noise behind me settle into a tense, expectant hush. Every step felt deliberate, controlled. As if my body understood something my heart was still catching up to. The dean stood a few feet away, his posture rigid, his eyes moving between me and the chaos unfolding in the rows of chairs. I could see the question on his face. He didn't ask it out loud. I leaned in slightly, close enough that only he could hear me. My voice didn't shake. It surprised even me. "There's already an integrity case open," I said quietly. That was it. One sentence. No names. No explanations. Just the truth. Placed carefully where it belonged. His expression changed instantly. Not confusion. Recognition, the kind that comes when a puzzle piece clicks into place. He straightened, nodded once, and lifted a hand to signal the ceremony staff. Behind us, my sister was still talking, still insisting, still trying to pull the room back toward her version of events. But the momentum had shifted. Faculty members moved with purpose now. A marshal stepped forward, not toward me, but toward the aisle. The microphone crackled as the dean cleared his throat. Conversations died mid-whisper. Phones hovered, forgotten, in the air. I stepped back to my place and waited. For the first time since my name had been called, I felt calm settle fully into my chest. Not relief. Certainty. I knew what the process demanded. I knew what records existed. I knew exactly how this would unfold once the right people were paying attention. My sister thought this walk was about humiliation. She was wrong. It was about timing, and I had placed the truth where it belonged. When the dean stepped back to the microphone, the auditorium felt smaller, like every wall had leaned inward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain. He simply asked for a moment of attention, and somehow, everyone listened. He spoke about academic integrity, about standards, about the responsibility of the institution to protect both fairness and truth. Each sentence landed heavier than the last. People shifted uncomfortably, realizing this was no longer a misunderstanding to be smoothed over. Then he said there was an active investigation. A collective breath was held. I felt it ripple through the room. Eyes flicked toward me, already prepared for confirmation, for removal, for spectacle. My sister straightened, a thin smile appearing like she was bracing for victory. The dean paused. Long enough for hope to form. Then he said the name. It wasn't mine. It was hers. The sound that followed wasn't a gasp. It was confusion breaking into shock. My sister's face drained of color so fast it looked unreal. She opened her mouth, then closed it, shaking her head as if denial alone could undo what had just been said. The dean continued, calm and precise. He referenced documented patterns, prior warnings, and verified evidence. Plagiarized sections. Inconsistent drafts. Sources reused across submissions. The kind of details that can't be argued away with emotion. My sister started crying loudly, insisting it was stress, pressure, misunderstanding. My parents stood up at the same time, voices overlapping, trying to explain, trying to protect, trying to rewind time. Security approached the aisle, not rushing but firm. My sister was asked to step outside. She resisted at first, then collapsed into sobs, her accusations dissolving into incoherent pleas. No one looked at me anymore. All attention had shifted to the truth unfolding where she stood. I remained where I was, hands folded, heart steady. I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. The kind that comes when something hidden is finally forced into the light. As my sister was escorted out, the room stayed silent. Not because they were waiting for more drama, but because they had just witnessed the cost of trying to destroy someone with a lie. And for the first time that day, I knew exactly how this story would end. The silence felt final, irreversible, sealing a moment none of us would ever be able to forget again before our eyes today there. The moment my sister disappeared through the side doors, the room exhaled in fragments. Whispers returned, but they sounded different now, lower, uncertain, edged with disbelief. People weren't speculating anymore. They were recalibrating. My parents rushed into the aisle, faces tight with panic. My mother tried to follow, calling my sister's name, her voice cracking as if volume alone could undo what had just happened. My father argued with a staff member in a hushed, urgent tone, gesturing toward the stage, toward me, toward the exits anywhere but the truth. Faculty members formed a quiet barrier, polite but immovable. Apologies started forming before anyone knew where to send them. I didn't know, my mother whispered, though she didn't look at me when she said it. This isn't what it looks like, my father added, too quickly, as if rehearsed, but there was nowhere left for their words to land. The damage had already spread, not loudly, but thoroughly. Phones were lowered. Screens dimmed. Faces that had watched my sister accuse me minutes earlier now avoided my eyes altogether. Exposure doesn't need commentary, it speaks for itself. No one asked me to explain. No one challenged me. The narrative had shifted so completely that defending myself would have felt unnecessary, almost intrusive. The dean spoke briefly again, stating that the ceremony would continue. His voice was steady, professional, final. Whatever chaos had erupted moments earlier was now contained, documented, and removed. As names resumed being called, I felt the weight of something lift, not because I'd been vindicated but because the truth no longer belonged only to me. My parents retreated to their seats, smaller somehow, quieter. They didn't reach for me. I didn't reach for them. Somewhere behind the stage, my sister was facing consequences she could no longer shout her way out of. And in the middle of it all, I stood exactly where I was supposed to be, untouched by the panic, unmoved by the blame, fully exposed only as myself. I crossed the stage when my name was called again, the sound of applause steady and real this time. It wasn't thunderous or performative, but it carried something better: recognition without obligation. The dean handed me my diploma, met my eyes, and nodded once. No speech. No commentary. Just completion. As I walked back to my seat, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I had won, but because I had stopped bracing myself for people who were never going to stand with me. The moment had clarified something I'd spent my life avoiding. After the ceremony, my phone buzzed with missed calls and messages I didn't open. Explanations, apologies, panic disguised as concern. I didn't owe anyone closure while I was still choosing my own peace. Outside the auditorium, families gathered for photos. Laughter, hugs, staged happiness. I stepped past it all and kept walking, the diploma warm in my hands, the future suddenly quiet and wide. For a long time, I believed success meant proving myself to the people who doubted me. That day taught me something different. Power isn't in defending your truth to those committed to misunderstanding you. It's in knowing when to walk forward without asking permission. I didn't leave angry. I didn't leave triumphant. I left complete, carrying my name, my work, and my future on my own terms, finally free from the need to be chosen by myself at last. If you've made it this far, I want to speak to you directly, not as a character in a story, but as someone who knows what it feels like to be doubted, exposed, or pushed to defend your worth in public. If you believe I did the right thing by staying calm, by choosing truth over chaos, leave a comment and tell me what you would have done in my place. Your voice matters here. What I learned is simple but powerful. You don't owe explanations to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Real strength isn't loud. It's prepared. It's knowing your truth so well that you don't panic when it's challenged. In life, protect your integrity early, document your work, and don't let silence be mistaken for weakness. Use it strategically. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Share your thoughts, share your story, and let's keep this space honest, supportive, and real.